I gave a little bit of brief introduction, and I'll just reiterate that basically I am a trainer here at the Learning House. I've worked on our library courses and curriculum and covered some topics including remedial English, math, as well as medical coding. Currently in the training department, I am one of the trainers who conducts teaching our best practice courses for faculty development, but I've also worked on teaching some copyright, FERPA, and even ADA workshops as well. So I am going to go ahead and get started with why this particular topic. And I want to go back a little bit into last July when the Learning House sponsored its 3rd annual Users Conference. And one of the panel discussions I moderated was titled Becoming an Online Instructor. 3 panelists from our partner schools discussed both the joys and challenges of teaching online. And their experiences were varied and resonated with many of the statements that you see on this slide and that you will see throughout this presentation. Most of our panelists recognize that the growth potential for online learning is evident. However, one panelist noted that they had little idea how much time and skill was involved when teaching an online course. Becoming an online instructor for the first time was initially daunting for all of our conference panelists, and they found that those face-to-face skills that they used in their traditional classroom did not always transfer well in the online classroom. So out of these experiences prompted that question, is there a way to find out what skills and attributes are necessary for online instructors? So when investigating that research question, I found researchers examine the roles as well as the function of an online instructor and what they need to perform. Essentially, an online instructor fills 6 different roles. That may include being a guide, a mentor, a catalyst, as well as even a coach or mediator. And lastly, they also assume the role of an assessment giver and resource provider. During my literature review, I reviewed the organizations or bodies of work that identified the competencies and standards for online instruction. And let's start with a couple of the national, regional, and even the Institutes of Higher Education. The Southern Regional Education Board, or SREB, is the nation's first regional nonprofit organization which sets policy for public education from pre-K to 12. The SREB actually published a report to examine specific factors for instructor readiness. Those factors included academic preparation, online teaching and learning methodology, content, knowledge, and skills, and even instructional technology. The SREB emphasized that the face-to-face instructor skills do not necessarily transfer over into the online classroom. And think about it, technology is rarely the primary means of communication in the face-to-face classroom, but it is important in the virtual classroom. Now, the International Association through K-12 Online Learning, or INACOL, actually endorsed SREB's work into its own national standards for quality online teaching. And INACOL standards are delineated between what an online teacher should know and understand to what the online teacher should be able to do for evaluation purposes. Many of these skills cross over into online instructor readiness, and more specifically, 1, understanding the concepts and structures of effective online instruction. Secondly, demonstrating and continuing with professional activity. And finally, an online instructor should be able to understand evaluating assessment data. Theodore Smith of Axia College, and now that's part of University of Phoenix, actually published a few years back 51 competencies that were required by online instructors. And these skill sets included facilitation, technology, lifelong learning, being a web evaluator, communicator of expectation, among others. Smith provided competencies of primary importance both before, during, as well as after the online course launches. And of his 51 competencies, a third of them were skills necessary before an instructor actually begins teaching online. All right, the medical field has led the forefront for actually examining instructor readiness. And this was evident by two studies I found, the first in Canada and the second in Iran. Canadian researchers from the University of Calgary and Memorial University of Newfoundland examined the experiences of 9 medical teachers who transitioned from the face-to-face to online instruction. The medical teachers had been in practice anywhere from 10 to 24 years, and they assumed a role anywhere from being an actual course designer to just simply teaching an online course. What the Canadian researchers found was that facilitators faced 2 challenges when they transitioned from face-to-face to online. The first being technical aspects that's associated with the actual medium. And the second is the skills of facilitation in the online environment. More importantly, these Canadian researchers suggested organizations looking to develop online learning should pay attention not only to the selection of instructors who are prepared to invest time and energy into technology, but also the time and energy into their facilitation skills. That second medical study was born out of a trio of medical researchers in Iran. And these researchers assessed instructor readiness for the e-learning programs in Iranian continuing medical education programs. The trio of researchers introduced a Likert scale that measured 2 domains, technical and pedagogical. Each of these 2 domains was further subdivided into questions analyzing 4 subdomains. And those 4 subdomains included knowledge, attitude, skills, as well as habits. So essentially CASH, an acronym for short. The trio devised their own 5-point Likert scale, and they disseminated that survey among 70 of their faculty members. The results of their study reiterated the need for training to be offered to instructors on a continuous rather than on a one-time basis. Continual training helps to update instructors' technology skills on a regular basis, as well as make sure that pedagogical innovations are continuously updated for online instructors. So, drawing on the work of these 5 literature reviews and bodies of work, that CASH approach resonated with the greatest appeal for the design of this instructor readiness questionnaire. So, distance learning research emphasizes that the learner is at the center of the learning process. So in that case, the online instructor must transition from being a sage on stage, more or less, to more of giving individual attention to his or her students. Student-centered learning shifts communication away from traditional one-way communication to a 2-way delivery method. So what this means is the online instructor must transition his or her on-campus pedagogical skills and apply them to the virtual environment. Now, let me revert back to that conference last summer, and most of our conference panelists failed to acknowledge the role of andragogy, collaborative learning, or other prominent online learning methods and theories. In fact, many of our panelists actually felt overwhelmed by the amount of time they needed to facilitate the course. All 5 of the literature works cite that pedagogical knowledge must be considered for readiness to teach online. And pedagogical knowledge can be characterized by an understanding of online teaching methodology and instructional strategies, and those strategies to provide really meaningful online experiences to achieve those learning outcomes. Certainly, an online instructor must meet the academic credentials and professional teaching standards in their requisite fields. But online teaching and learning has also adopted a community of inquiry framework. And some of you may be familiar with that COI, or community of inquiry, which is characterized by students who arrive at a conclusion to a goal or a problem, but collaboratively. So examples of communities of inquiry may range from small groups to entire cohort programs. In collaborative learning, one student does not assume knowledge just from that instructor, but he is collaborative learning it from not only the instructor, but as well as with students as well. Researchers also noted that a key characteristic of collaborative learning is the instructor as a mediator. And this means building a community of learners requires that an instructor be a facilitator who can establish trust and communicate expectations, encourage group interaction as well. An instructor encourages students how to learn, which is a concept different from the face-to-face classroom model in which the instructor provides course information and materials to students. Without the physical classroom, managing small and large group discussions is vital towards establishing collaborative learning in the online classroom. But some instructors have difficulty understanding that students participating in the online discussion forum is really not much different than students occupying desks in the physical classroom. Management of online groups requires an instructor to gauge student-instructor interaction, but also that student-to-student interaction. So just like the physical classroom, sometimes this behavior can be very dynamic and can also be tempestuous as well. So when we actually designed questions on the questionnaire, we examined the frequency with which an instructor has used active learning activities to meet learning objectives, be that in their physical classroom or maybe if they've taught an online class. We also are looking at the frequency in which an instructor has managed group discussion to meet learning objectives. We're looking with frequency at whether or not an instructor has managed inappropriate student behavior. We also want to see if the instructor has made announcements of impending deadlines to his or her students as a way of keeping students on task in the course. Also, we're looking at frequency with which an instructor is giving student feedback. And that includes not only the strengths the students come forth with, but also areas which need student improvement. And finally, the set of questions is looking at frequency with which an instructor is reinforcing student expectations and requirements that are set forth in the course syllabus. We next want to look at pedagogical attitude. And one of our conference panelists actually experienced problems converting student interaction from his traditional classroom over into his online classroom. So to address this problem, what he did is wrote forum questions which used open-ended Socratic method of questioning. He often played a devil's advocate at times to keep the conversation vibrant, but he did acknowledge that it took time to transition this role from somebody who was just delivering content to his students to one who's actually facilitating that content in behalf of his students. And the literature review seemed to concur with this assessment. In fact, 4 of the 5 literature reviews noted that the primary importance of online instructors is becoming willing to participate as a facilitator for open communication. Online instructors should have a positive mindset toward the changing paradigm of teaching and learning. And an online class can actually capture the footprints of an instructor's behavior. So motivation for learning and receptivity, especially for self-directed learning and self-management skills, are basically 2 main ingredients that an online instructor should foster. Keeping up with the literature which highlights online learning theories and methods are really recommended. And in order to keep abreast of the latest research, it's recommended that an online instructor either attend a conference, if not publish or ideally present at a conference on distance learning. Some of the literature recommended that online instructors actually seek out campus resources or an instructional designer who can mentor them as they kind of adjust their teaching skills in the online environment. So taking a look at the questions that we ask on the survey is we're delving into whether or not an instructor, first of all, reads articles on pedagogical distance learning methods, be that in a scholarly publication or a trade. And those pedagogical learning methods may include self-directed learning, collaborative learning, and certainly the community of inquiry. We also are looking at in the questions whether or not an instructor has even attended a conference or perhaps served on a committee that focused on pedagogical distance learning methods. And finally, for those more or less instructors who are above and beyond, whether or not an instructor has actually published an article or presented at a conference addressing those pedagogical distance learning methods. The next area that was brought up in the literature is pedagogical skills. And this is attributed to designing and developing instructional media or activities for their online class. And our conference panelists readily admitted this was a very cumbersome task for them. In fact, many of the online instructors in our panelists tended to be the least informed about copyright, but they were the individuals who developed and designed content material more frequently than any other individual on their own campuses. Some of our conference panelists approach course design with the mindset of content as more or less a least common denominator. Essentially, keep content as simple as possible. The problem is that may not always translate well with the end user. So effective learning actually depends on designing those learning experiences for the online student. And that online student, remember, often works in isolation. So incorporating group activities as an instructional strategy really does foster student learning. Every online student approaches course content from different learning styles. This is very much the same for an on-campus student as well as an off-campus student. So those considerations need to be considered as well. And those considerations are dependent on the selection then of instructional media and how it's delivered, especially in the area of course navigation from the end user's perspective. Moreover, designing course materials that are web accessible is not only best practice, but it's also responsibility of being ADA compliant. Even if an online instructor may never design an online course or course materials, it is important for them to understand the reasoning behind that development. So pairing with a campus librarian or instructional designer can actually help improve an instructor's competency when vetting instructional resources, be that on the internet or from their instructional designer on campus. They understand why those tools are designed the way they are. And likewise, an instructor who has a really strong pedagogical skill might consider creating a wiki or even a web page of instructional materials that they can share among their other members in their department. So when designing questions on our survey, we focused on frequency with which an instructor will use supplemental learning activities. We'll also look at the frequency with which an instructor will design learning activities that addresses a variety of student learning styles. We also want to see the frequency with which an instructor may have incorporated web-accessible tools for students with physical, visual, hearing, speech, or cognitive disabilities. And finally, we're looking at those instructors who are frequent users of group work or group projects that meet learning objectives in their course. Lastly, in the pedagogical area, we're going to concentrate on pedagogical habit. And incorporating all the pedagogical knowledge, attitude, and skills into a consistent habit really does separate the experienced online instructor from the novice instructor. In fact, many of our panelists readily agreed that a new instructor could not be expected to know everything about teaching online by their first course launch. However, many of our conference panelists pointed out that because they were pressured for time to launch their course, they quickly uploaded their course materials and just used it for their online students. They really didn't understand whether or not that medium would achieve the learning outcomes they needed it to achieve. Researchers acknowledge that knowledge, attitude, and skills of an instructor will not materialize into effective instruction unless the appropriate habits doing these activities are actually being implemented. So what this means is the online instructor should be prepared to use multiple strategies or approaches during online delivery. Certain face-to-face instructional strategies may transition into the online environment. For example, an instructor can contact a non-participating student during the first week of a course launch in their online course. This should be a habit they can do whether in the face-to-face or in the online course. The library, campus resources, writing center, tutoring center, career center, those are also all campus resources that an online instructor can easily refer to their online students just as they would if they were speaking in front of their physical students. So when we devised questions on the survey about pedagogical habit, we looked with frequency with which an instructor converted face-to-face instructional materials and activities online. We also want to examine the frequency with which an instructor contacts those non-participatory students beyond just that first week of the course. Are they regularly finding out which students are falling behind and aren't entering into the course and reaching out to those students? We also survey the instructor to see with frequency whether or not they encourage students to partake in those support services, even events or extracurricular activities that are sponsored by the traditional brick-and-mortar campus. All right, I want to take a little bit of a commercial break here, and I want to introduce you a bit to the average high schooler. And this is a member of Generation Z. And Generation Z are those emerging students who spent their entire life with the World Wide Web. And this is exemplified, and many of you are well aware of this because you may have children who fit this criteria quite well. Generation Z students, they are on Facebook, Twitter, iTunes, everything's accessible right from their cell phone. In fact, for many of these high school students, they can fill out one college application and it's pushed out to multiple colleges on one common app portal. These high school students have been immersed in both those media technologies and mobile tech devices all of their young lives. And this is really what makes them different from their tail-end baby boomer or Generation X parents, or even their aunts and uncles who are millennials. And so why do I take this time to actually introduce you to Generation Z? Well, in the not-so-near future, they are going to actually grace your campus and most likely will take an online class during their post-secondary career. Generation Z is the most diverse generation to date, and they're very comfortable mixing in with ethnic and diverse social circles. Generation Z, on the other hand, is the least likely to wait for information to be filtered from and by previous generations. So what this means is Generation Z can curate information at such a faster rate than the generations that precede them. And so this doesn't always mean that they really have well-formed metacognitive skills. They feel they do because they can do rapid retrieval off Google searches, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're moving beyond the real critical thinking skills they're going to need for their post-secondary careers. And although Generation Z is comfortable in troubleshooting their own technical problems, they are really going to expect an online instructor to be equally, if not more so, at ease with technical troubleshooting. So this comes to the next set of our survey, is the technical cache. And as important as pedagogical cache is, the technical knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits are a must for a successful online course instructor. Researchers acknowledge that instructors must not only be trained to use technology, but also shift the way they organize as well as deliver material through that technology. And this statement was confirmed by our summer conference panelists. Online instructors should be familiar, certainly, with the learning management system. And many of our panelists were unprepared for the amount of time it took for them to get accustomed to the features and settings of their LMS. And in addition to with fluency with LMS tools, researchers recommended that online instructors have a basic knowledge of computer software and file formatting differences. Computer software, most often used by online students, can run the gamut from Microsoft Office to Google Docs. However, many don't always understand the difference between a rich text file and a PDF file. And it becomes even more frustrating for an instructor who's trying to open a file with which they don't even have the software for. From my own experience as an academic librarian, many on-campus instructors failed to realize the technical support services that were available to their online students. It was equal to what their physical students had as well. Understanding the most preferred mobile apps and mobile software utilities students use is also recommended for an online instructor. For example, here at the Learning House, we suggest iPad mobile users use a Mobile EZ app when attempting to upload assignments or participate in Moodle class activities. However, we equally inform such users that that current Moodle app does not necessarily perform all of Moodle functions perfectly or properly. So instructors should have a basic knowledge about the best practices for designing an online course. Instructors who design courses may have access to those institutional resources such as graphic designers or licensed image banks, but sometimes they aren't even aware of those resources. And perhaps, as some of our conference panelists were, they're under tight deadlines, so they fail to even seek out those resources. In such cases, an instructor may even circumvent and seek resources that actually pose a copyright compliance problem. Many of our panelists agreed that adopting a master course philosophy really helped them with course design as well as course delivery. So when choosing and designing questions on our readiness survey, we wanted to examine the frequency with which an instructor troubleshoots student file format and software problems. This could include not only word processing, but also spreadsheet and presentation programs. We also want to look at the frequency with which an instructor troubleshoots students' questions just focusing on the LMS. How do I upload an assignment? How do I delete a post, if I can delete one at all? We're looking with frequency with which an instructor may explain student services, either through campus or non-campus. And finally, we're looking to see the frequency with which an instructor designs or develops online courses.
Just a quick question from Rick. Where does one get the Moodle iOS app?
Rick, I would say I would do a quick Google search, and you could probably find the link just from doing a Google search. If that's unsuccessful, you can always contact our Moodle technical support help. And unfortunately, hang on 1 minute, because I can get that number. It is a toll-free number. If you'd like, Rick, you can give me a call at 502-815-0579, and I can easily also get that app to you as well. But I would do a Google search for that app as well. That's probably your easiest. Great. Looks like I don't have any other questions aside from Rick right now. You're welcome, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. And again, Emily's going to monitor your chat, and we are certainly going to hold your questions to the end. So if you do have one, we will get to it. So moving along into technical knowledge, this is another set of aptitudes we are examining. And this relates to learning or becoming familiar with technology that takes time, but it does pay off in the long run. And even though there's a technology learning curve, all of our conference panelists concurred that both on-campus resources, such as your IT help desk, or even off-site help, such as Learning House's support help, or YouTube videos, they actually help foster interest in adding the best technology to achieve your learning outcomes. Panelists noted it helped when an instructor had some basic HTML coding. However, it really isn't necessary because the LMS does pretty much that coding all for you. What is necessary is an online instructor to have an open mindset to technology. For example, say if an instructor regards technology with suspicion or even distrust, most likely you're going to find that instructor is not going to use the technology to its full capacity in his or her course. We have seen this occur often in some of our library courses, that when an instructor uses one of our library courses, they often hid or even deleted a particular interactivity and actually replaced it with a static PDF file. So it really is important that an online instructor understands the need to continuously update himself or herself about the evolving technology tools that support online learning. How do you do this? Well, the easiest way is to set up an RSS reader. You can also read and subscribe to internet news outlets, or even those of you who are familiar with your campus library subscription databases, such as EBSCOhost, can actually set up alerts on those databases. And you can have articles, anytime they're published on the database, basically force-fed into your email. There is a British consultant named Jane Hart. She actually assembled a free website that has new technologies that an online instructor should be familiar with. And again, if you want to do a Google search, her name is Jane Hart, H-A-R-T. She assembled what is called the Center for Learning and Performance Technologies. And the acronym for that is C4LPT. Do a quick Google search and you will have a wonderful basic blog, and you can actually sign up for this list of technologies with which Jane has culled together. And anytime she adds to it, you can get free alerts of those technologies. So, going back, moving forward, to our technical attitude. That is our next set, and I think I actually skipped a slide or went back. Okay, questions on technical attitude. We are examining if an instructor has first of all read about those emerging technologies or utilities. And again, have they read using those RSS news feeders or even through internet news outlets? We also want to see if an instructor has incorporated those latest technologies into their actual online course. So we're looking at not only the novice, but also the exemplary instructor who's taking those utilities and actually incorporating them. The next area, aptitude of being addressed, is technical skills. And researchers readily admit that instructors must have competencies for the basic computing, as well as the technical skills related to internet usage. What does this mean? Essentially that instructors should understand, number one, URL construction, should have a basic idea of the difference between a search engine and a subject directory, should understand web browser functionality, and even, preferably, mobile device basic knowledge. I've worked with many instructors who did not understand how to troubleshoot student internet connectivity problems or even web browser issues. Some instructors don't realize that even Moodle, the most preferred browser is actually Firefox to use for Moodle. This is especially relevant when students take online quizzes and we want to prevent them from being timed out, or if students attempt to use the browser back button during an automated quiz. These are kind of essential technical skills that are really important for an instructor to be able to communicate to a student. Online instructors should be flexible to adjust their delivery methods between both asynchronous as well as synchronous communication because they complement each other in online learning. None of our conference panelists actually use synchronous communication in their classroom. For those of you who are unfamiliar, synchronous communication is basically what I'm doing right now, is a WebEx or an Illuminate. Some of you may be familiar with Adobe Connect or Wimba. Essentially, asynchronous communication actually creates social presence among students. And research has found that social presence actually leads to a greater sense of community, and that community can actually lead to greater student motivation. In turn, that student motivation increases engagement, persistence, and even retention. In fact, Brigham Young University in Idaho has adopted the use of case studies from their on-ground business class into their online course. And what that BYU instructor does is he offers as many as 3 synchronous touch points with students each week by engaging them in actual video synchronous question prompts. So how many times have you cringed when you've had students that have used web resources from that quick Google search? I'm sure many of you have felt you knew right off the bat that students were just finding internet resources from that top of the Google list. Unless the instructor really recognizes currency, authority, purpose, and even bias in some websites and has the ability to explain that to students, the trend really for students to have inappropriate web resources in their assignments is really going to continue. An example, Rasmussen College has their campus librarian attend one live lecture for their medical coding courses. They found that particular guest lecturer actually helped students increase their scores on that assignment from 64% to 84% as a result. So there's a true benefit for using synchronous components in a course. Lastly, it's important that online instructors manage LMS tools and resources efficiently because LMSs update frequently. Case in point, we just upgraded to a new version of Moodle just on Monday. The last version was probably only about 3 to 6 months old. Updates happen frequently. So understanding those LMS settings and utilities can give an online instructor an easier transition when future upgrades occur. In some cases, we have actually seen instructors incorrectly use the LMS tools, basically due to lack of training. For example, we actually had instructors upload graded student assignments into discussion forums, and this could be a potential FERPA violation, especially if students can see each other's grades. So hesitation toward LMS settings can actually thwart a course being efficient. It can lead to problems with academic integrity, and it can also lead to problems with course delivery. So when we actually devised questions on the survey about technical skills, we examined the frequency with which an instructor troubleshoots internet connectivity and browser issues. We're looking at the frequency with which an instructor explains how to evaluate websites, be that they understand URL construction and the difference between a search engine and search directory. We also want to see how many times an instructor may have conducted a live classroom using synchronous tools. as well as that instructor who's been frequent enough to customize their own LMS settings in their course. Lastly, we're examining technical habit. And just like we did with pedagogical habit, pulling together that technical knowledge, attitude, and skills into a discipline is what most researchers say is truly necessary. And so with the prevalence of social networking tools like Twitter, Facebook, it's important instructors understand the potential legal ramifications for allowing course material and student information to be exposed in such an open environment. Although some online instructors may have a comfort level focusing on one online activity, for example, discussion forums, they may not be able to manipulate another area of technology, for instance, facilitate a synchronous session like this one. Often, instructors may circumvent the password-protected LMS and actually upload content into their personal blogs. And this can run the risk of personal identifiable information being released and thus a possible FERPA violation. If a web user accessible to student information posted on a Facebook class page can actually draw a relation to identify a student, then that information probably counts as personally identifiable information, and again, subject to FERPA. So a student information doesn't need to be a social security number. It could be just a brief mention of how many credits the student is taking. If an instructor requires his or her students to be self-directed and self-disciplined in their own learning, again, so too should the instructor exhibit that type of self-directed behavior. Many of our panelists agreed that waiting until the course launched to verify that dead links weren't present or audio and speech equipment worked or settings weren't correct really was stressful. And no instructor certainly wants to start the course being bombarded with frantic student emails about content that's missing or isn't working. So most of our panelists totally acknowledge that they created a checklist for missing unavailable material, and they really would have liked to have had a sandbox, like a practice course, in which they could really play with some of the LMS tools and check out and make sure they were comfortable with settings before they began. So, as we wind down on the last set of questions on our survey, we are examining the frequency with which an instructor communicates with students via their personal web page or social network website during the last term. Again, that has ramifications to possibly FERPA and even copyright. We also are examining whether or not that instructor has conducted a presentation using a synchronous tool. This gives practice not only to the instructor for being comfortable using technology, but also students as well. So let's get to the actual meat and potatoes of the actual student assessment. And the actual questionnaire is a self-assessment that after 4 drafts, we narrowed down from an initial 100 questions down to 30 questions. We actually had 2 PhDs and 1 education doctoral candidate examine and vet it. We had the survey piloted among 3 of our partner schools, and we originally built the survey on Google Docs for that beta test. What we really wanted to do is have the survey have feedback, and not just one kind of feedback, but 2 kinds of feedback. Feedback for the survey takers once they complete this section, as well as the survey taker once they complete the question. What we found is the average completion time for the actual questionnaire took as little as 10 minutes. The next slide actually gives you an example of the first set of questions and what it looks like on Google Docs. Very simple to set up, very easy to deploy as well. At the end, there's a wonderful results page that gave a pie chart of results. The only thing the Google Docs did not give was the actual scoring feedback. And here on the next slide is an actual example of what the reporting feature just from Google Docs looks like. And I apologize that that typeset's very small, but it does give you an example of how the survey can be deployed. You can set it up yourself and actually use it using a very simple open source tool like Google Docs. All right, so as we wind down, what are some of the considerations for use? Essentially, data from this questionnaire can be useful for both your administrator as well as your instructor. Let's start with the administrator. They can use this as a potential hiring tool, as well as to define staff training needs. If an administrator requires his or her existing staff to complete the questionnaire, that PC can actually obtain a benchmark score and then retest their staff on an annual basis to basically see whether or not there's been change or improvement in certain areas. Survey data may also highlight that exceptional faculty, which can be helpful for both merit and tenure reviews. Now, flipping over to the instructor side, this is basically a self-assessment tool, so it can really highlight areas where additional training may be needed. If taken over a period of time, the test taker can actually see a difference, maybe or maybe not, in their performance results. And this can be useful for whether or not they're going up for merit review, if not tenure reviews as well. So I know we are coming close to the end of our presentation, and I am going to now open it up, since Emily's been probably monitoring chat, and open it up to you all to see what questions you may have at this time for me.
One of the questions we had was people wanted the Jane Hart information again, and if you could spell it out exactly how to find it.
If this is helpful for all of you, I'm going to go ahead and type it in the chat box, because I know that's a little difficult. Jane Hart. Let me go back and find. All right. And let's see here. Center for Learning. Bear with my spelling. Technologies. Again, it's C4LPT. If you do a Google search on that, I think you'll find her blog will come up on at least the first page of results.
A few questions from different people that are all related to the same thing, which is the survey available for people to use? Is it copyrighted or available via Creative Commons? And how can they get a copy of the survey questions?
Okay, excellent question. For those of you who would like a copy of the survey questions, feel free to email me. You're more than welcome to call. Email's probably a little more efficient because I can then get your email and get it to you quickly. The survey itself, I can be happy to extend to you the survey questions if you email, or I'm sorry, the survey questions. Go ahead and email me, and I will send you the document with the questions. If you have an interest with this survey and deploying it, and you do not want to create it yourself, please email me, because I can suggest a possible web portal that can be used for the survey deployment. If you do not want to create it yourself, just go ahead and email me. Be happy to extend that. For those of you who want the survey to be able to route it first to your instructors, that's perfectly fine. Again, I can send you a PDF copy. It is copyrighted, so it is not open source. But again, I'd be happy to send you a PDF copy if you'd like. Just email me.
Autumn Witt has a question. Do you have evidence of instructors overestimating their abilities, proficiency in the self-evaluation? Are there any external validity checks that can be used? Great question.
No, we were hoping that with the number of questions in each essential aptitude that we could maybe pinpoint whether or not an instructor is maybe fudging, I don't know if fudging is the right word, or maybe over-enthusiastic of their abilities. Whether or not there's a way we can actually pinpoint that, probably looking at maybe their course itself and examining if there's a particular aptitude that you feel or that may be a flag to an instructor may have more confidence in their ability than they truly have. Then that particular question, you may want to go and look at their online course and see if, if they actually are, what is in the course is actually similar to what they're typing in there as an answer. And let me give you an example, because that was a little convoluted. Say, for instance, an instructor indicates that they're very comfortable in their explaining to students web browser, how to take an automated quiz, LMS settings. You may want to go into their actual online course if they have taught online and determine whether or not in any of the messages, if an instructor has been messaged by their class on troubleshooting web browser issues when they had to take an automated test in their class. You may also want to see if the instructor posted any news forums that gave instructions for web browser functionality for an automated test. So sometimes you can look at the online course itself an instructor teaches to verify that what they're actually answering the question is pretty much in line with how they actually teach.
Another question. Our faculty are part of a union, and requiring any sort of training before they teach is not possible. What suggestions do you have for communicating to campus leadership the importance of adequate preparation before assigning instructors to online classes?
Oh, I guess I would say let the instructors take a sample of this questionnaire survey. You can pinpoint then what are some of the areas needing training needs, and you actually then have data to prove what areas are lacking or may need a little additional training. This could be a great way of proving that. It's just by having them take it and then using that data to support your mission on having additional training for faculty.
There's a question about, have you published anything related to the deployment of the survey results?
Not really, because at this point it's a self-assessment tool. All of the results have been for beta testing. Let me get you back up. And we've not published the results. They're really strictly for institutional use only, as well as for the instructor use only. So no, we have not gone public to publish results of the survey. In fact, we really use them just for beta testing at this time. I hope that answers your question. Okay, any other questions that you may have? It looks like some of you are actually talking about some of your own certification classes for training. This is kind of a nice segue into, for those of you who are unfamiliar with, the Learning House does provide both technical training. We do provide Moodle technical training specifically, and we do offer a best practice faculty development course. It's usually 5 weeks in length, and it does specifically address online course delivery. It's called BP 502, and if you have interest in either the technical Moodle training or even the best practice training, feel free to email me as well and I can give you more information. Any other questions you may have? Alina, and I'm assuming you're referring to is the best practice course online? If it is, yes, all of our courses are online. Our technical courses are self-paced, which means you can conduct them at your own time and leisure. The best practice, BP 501, is actually a 5-week, but it is asynchronous, but there are requirements for assignments. And at the completion, students who complete successfully are awarded a certificate of completion. So it is a 5-week course with forums and assignments in it as well, and that's BP 501. I hope that answers your question, Alina. Excellent. Does anybody else have questions I can answer? I know Emily's busy typing and probably addressing your question about recording availability.
While we wait to see if anybody else has any other questions, I just want to let people know about some upcoming webinars and events that we have. In May, we will be hosting a webinar about student authentication, and I encourage everybody to come learn about the latest information and making sure your students online are who they say they are. We are hosting an online users conference here in Louisville, Kentucky, and you can come meet Mimi in person and hear her share more of her knowledge, and that will be in June. And then in July, we actually will be sharing the results from our second annual online college student survey. So we'll be doing that as a webinar as well. So I encourage all of you to register and attend.
Wonderful. And Heidi, I know you had mentioned original sources. I'd be happy to give you those. If you want to go ahead and email me, I can give you the reference list of those 5 literature works that I used in the development of the survey. Be happy to extend that. Just go ahead and send me an email. And I'm just going to go back one slide. There's my email, M.O'Malley, don't worry about the apostrophe, @learninghouse.com. You can certainly call me, but email is probably the most efficient. I'm putting up again the slide Emily has about upcoming webinars. Would love to meet all of you at Connect. I will be actually doing a presentation on synchronous sessions. So looking forward to it and finding some really great information that I hope you all will enjoy for those of you who attend. Thank you, Brian, as well. Does anybody else have questions? Sandra, I will go ahead and talk to you afterwards, but anybody else have questions that I can answer for as a group? I certainly appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much.
And just a reminder, everybody, we will be emailing the slides out within 24 hours, and a recording should be available on learninghouse.com within a week.
Thank you all. Have a good week, good day, and hope to see you at Connect.